Good afternoon. My name is Paul Odette. I'm the artistic co-director of the Boston Early Music Festival, together with my colleague Stephen Stubbs, who's preserving his voice at the moment. We're also functioning as the musical co-directors of this afternoon's production of Telemann's Don Quixote. And to my right here is our choreographer, Marie-Nathalie Lacoursière. Telemann is a composer who is probably the most misunderstood and underestimated of all Baroque composers that I can think of in modern times. At the time, he was considered the greatest German composer, and in fact, they wanted him everywhere. But today, we know him primarily for his very light and charming and entertaining trio sonatas, solo sonatas, and so on. This is a result of a business decision that Telemann made, which is that he knew if he published music that would be bought by wealthy aristocrat amateur musicians, that he could make a lot of money. And that is the repertoire that was first transcribed and made into modern editions and is mostly what we think of as the music of Telemann. But the reason he was so highly regarded at the time was because of his magnificent operas, his oratorios, his passions. We have 48 passion settings of Telemann that survive, some of which are absolutely incredible music on the level of the great Bach passions, and over 1,200 cantatas. He composed a new cantata every Sunday. These have not even, for the most part, been edited in modern times, to say anything of studied and performed. So there's a whole aspect of Telemann's musical output in various genres that we have still to discover today. And that's starting to happen in a serious way. Now, as an opera composer, Telemann composed not only tragedies, but he was famous for his comic operas because he had a very keen sense of humor, which he could portray musically extremely effectively. Unfortunately, most of these comic operas have been lost. We have two full-length comic operas of Telemann, Socrates and Damon, and we have the one intermezzo Pimpinone, which we performed here 3 years ago and will perform again this June at the June festival. Very late in his life, around 1758, an 18-year-old boy wonder, poet, literary scholar, polyglot by the name of Daniel Schiebeler wrote a libretto for a hoped-for opera on an episode from Don Quixote of Cervantes. And he presented this to Telemann, and Telemann was immediately interested in the prospect of composing another comic opera. This libretto was clearly designed for a theatrical production. There are stage instructions, there are descriptions of dances, there is a large pantomime. Marie-Nathalie will describe all of that to you in a few moments. When he presented this to Telemann, Telemann recognized that the Hamburg Opera had just gone out of business, and it would not be possible to present this as an actual staged piece. So the autograph score of Don Quixote has no dance music. It doesn't even have an overture. It starts with the first aria. So the dilemma presented to anyone wanting to give a modern performance of this piece is, do you perform the concert version that Telemann had to write because he didn't have a theater he could use, or try to restore it to the original concept? And our stage director, Gilbert Blin, wanted very much to restore the original concept that Schiebler and Telemann had conceived of. So then the question became, okay, what do we do to add all of the bits that are missing from the autograph score? And one obvious candidate was an earlier suite that Telemann had composed, the burlesque of Don Quixote, which has various depictions of famous episodes from the story. Again, Marie-Nat will describe this to you in more detail in a moment. And for the pantomime section, in the beginning of the third scene, we needed quite a lot of dance music. And because the scoring of the serenata included 2 trumpets and timpani, I immediately thought of one of my very favorite Baroque orchestral suites, a magnificent D major suite for exactly that scoring. So we used those dances for the pantomime, and that provided the overture for the beginning of the piece. So we've actually made a kind of mashup of the Don Quixote that Telemann composed, his complete burlesque suite, and the D major suite. And of course, we can't be sure that he used any of these movements, or would have had he been able to have performed this as an opera. But we know that this D major suite was performed during operas because the bass line of it appears in its entirety in the manuscript of another Telemann opera. So he clearly viewed that piece as having theatrical qualities that could be employed. So for the details on the dance and how we put all of this together, I'll pass it on to Marie-Nat.
And pardon my sheets, I can really well improvise Commedia dell'arte, but my English is less good for improvisation. So I wrote. So the dance and pantomime components you will see this afternoon highlight different aspects of dance practices from the Baroque period. They serve to distinct dramatic function, 2 distinct dramatic function. And in the first part of the opera, like Paul said, the suite burlesque is seamlessly integrated into the story. And of course, this suite evokes famous episodes from Don Quixote adventures, such as, which are the famous Sancho episode? Windmills. What else? Dulcinea, of course. What else? The blanket scene where Sancho gets thrown in the air as well. So, and this music is really, really descriptive of what's happening. So it's very interesting. So in the opera, Don Quixote and Sancho are not living those episodes in real time, but they remembering them. So these memories take shape in their minds and are brought to life by the dancers in pantomime style. So the music of the burlesque suite is highly evocative, like I said, yet it does not conform to traditional Baroque dance forms like the minuet and the sarabande. The exception, there's always exception, is the passacaille, which actually we have included in the second half of the show, because it's part of the grand celebration at the end of the marriage. And passacaille often serve climatic moments in tragédie lyrique, providing a sense of grandeur and closer. So only the passacaille is in the second half. So in this second half, we present a grand divertissement organized for the marriage of Camacho and Quiteria. And the pantomime in this section is a festive offering, and it was meant to entertain the guest at the marriage. So it was restored from the original libretto, thanks to Gilbert Blain, the stage director, whose brilliant idea to include and create me more work in this opera. So that's good. So for this pantomime, we use the trumpet suite, which is filled with Baroque dance form, such as minuet, gavotte, un lentement, which could serve as a grande entrée for solo male soloist. And there as well, and there's another music in this that is called postillon. And that's really interesting. Postillon, do you know what the postillon is? And it's a gigue, it's sort of a gigue. It's not the French dotted rhythm, but it's still in 6/8, 2-beat, very fast. And do you know what a postillon was? It's a French word. Do some of you know? No. Well, it was actually the person who was riding the horse for the carriage, and postillon probably because it was for mailing delivery. He was, riding on the horse of the carriage. He was right on it, and it's for the mailing delivery. And I think we would need that in Canada because our Canadian Post is on strike right now. But that's another thing. Yes. So what is a pantomime in the 18th century? Pantomime as an art form emerged in the 17th and 18th century, deeply rooted in European theatrical traditions, particularly Italian, French, and English influences. So the Italian one, Commedia dell'arte. The pantomime sort of draw a little bit from the Commedia dell'arte, which is a form, Italian theater, and characterized by characters, very archetypal characters, such as Harlequin. They do acrobatics, and of course, they mime stuff. It's a theater that is really in the physicality. We have as well the court ballet, ou ballet de cour, this form with Louis XIII and Louis XIV, integrated strong gestural and narrative elements. Although the dance was the primary form in the performance, of course, a lot of use of the movement to convey mythological and allegorical stories. And, of course, there was as well the théâtre de foire, fairground theater or fair theater that we did outside. In Paris, there was La Foire Saint-Laurent and Foire Saint-Germain, and the pantomime was important because the spoken theater was banned at one period. They couldn't speak, so they had to do something else, so they developed this as well. So that's another moment where they start to develop this as well. And the English influence, mainly with John Weaver. He was an English dancing master. He was a choreographer and théoriste. And he was one of the first to really start to develop the pantomime and ballet. And his innovative work in the early 18th century laid the groundwork for narrative dance. And he wrote different books. And he did a play or a pantomime or a ballet called The Loves of Mars and Venus. And this is 1717, so it's even earlier. And this production is considered one of the first modern ballet. The dancers are telling a story. They're not just there to represent different characters, they're telling the story with their body. And so he was a writer. He wrote The History of Mimes and Pantomimes in 1728. And of course, it led us to later, in 1760, and actually it's the year of this opera, with Jean-Georges Noverre, a French choreographer. And Noverre really formalized the concept of ballet d'action, where dance, music, costumes, and sets converge to tell a coherent and emotional, engaging story. So before, a ballet could have meant a lot of dance and a little bit of singing. Then we arrive later, it's a lot of singing, a lot of dance. And then at one moment, okay, enough of this. The dance is growing out of this, and we can perform in our own and go into, and that's what is the ballet and the 19th century ballet after that. So the pantomime is really sort of in the roots of all that. So the characteristics of the pantomime, of course, is physical expression, storytelling through gesture. We could say exaggerating movements, but for us it's not exaggerated, but spectacular visual, striking costume and scenery that captivated audiences. And the music, of course, the music was essential for enhancing emotion and action. So in our production, second half, I approached the pantomime by blending the original text of the pantomime, because we have the text that tells all the action. So the original text and story supported by the trompette suite. So this suite feature were not Baroque dance. Like I said, it starts with a minuet, we go into a gavotte and a gigue. And in this, you have Welt and Cupid that are engaging in a fight. And it is a little bit what's happening in the opera. Is she going to marry the rich or the poor shepherd? And I'm not telling you how the pantomime will end, and don't look in the program, but maybe it's not even, but it's very interesting. So it is a fight between the two. We use the trumpet suite to do the different actions and different dance. And how the choreography, I mixed the style, the grand style, la danse haute, the grand style of the French Baroque, the low style as well, that the people would dance, the peasant would dance, and some acrobatic, because you need acrobatic as well, so some acrobatic element as well, some gesture. And to add to the mixer, to the blender, because the story is about Don Quixote and Sancho, I said it would be interesting to have a little Spanish flavor. And as the period, they really like everything that was exotic. We can think of Rameau, Les Indes Galantes, where they go to Peru, they go to America, they go to different places. They really like this. So I said, okay, what were the dance in fashion at that period? And there are many, of course. The fandango, and you probably heard the fandango, is very difficult to trace how the fandango evaluate, because it evaluates for many, many, many years. So I decided to take a dance called the Sevillana, and maybe there are some Spanish dancers here. No, maybe, no. Yeah, a little bit. So the Sevillana is a dance that was danced often to celebrate something, and it could be danced at a marriage. And so I took the first copla, the first verse of the Sevillana, and I put it into the pasacai, because the Sevillana are in 3 as well, and the pasacaya is in 3. And the step were the first copla, the step were interesting for this. So I mixed a little bit some of those steps in the pasacai. And as for the arms motion, it's a bit difficult to know as well. We have paintings, so we see where were the arms at that period. I know that through the 18th century, the arms kept going up. and up and up. And you can see that as well in the costume, because in the 17th century, you cannot raise your arm there at court, especially at court. So again, it's our modern, with information that we know, our modern view of how they could have feel that music. Because the point, as well as for a choreographer, well, my point to me is really to embody the music on stage. So the music that you hear, you see it with your eyes. So because the connection in the Baroque period, the connection with the music and the dance is really, really, really intricate, really woven. You understood. Tricoter, we say tricoter in French, knit. Yeah, exactly. So by mixing all that, my view is still that, is how am I serving this music? How am I serving this plot of what's happening with all those little influence? And I have a conclusion. And maybe we can have some questions. What is my conclusion? Yes, well, that's what I said. I approached the dance component by blending elements of haute danse from the Baroque period, pantomime practices, acrobatics in the spirit of the Commedia dell'arte, and Spanish influences such as the Sevillana, along with stylistic interpretation of Spanish movement and steps. And I hope you will enjoy this exploration in dance and pantomime, celebrating the rich traditions and creativity of the Baroque area. Yeah.
When the 18-year-old Daniel Schiebler approached Telemann about this, and Telemann started thinking about it, he was very actively engaged in reshaping the libretto so that it could be produced as a concert performance. Now, this story, Don Quixote auf der Hochzeit des Camacho, the story about Camacho is an episode in Cervantes' Don Quixote, which is not well known today. It was quite popular in the 17th and 18th centuries, but it's not a story that we know today, like the windmill and the Sancho being thrown around by the blankets and so on. And in order to make it read for the public, they decided to begin the opera with reminiscing about all of the famous events that had happened. So that's not really part of the plot of the opera. It just puts context into the whole thing, this bantering back and forth in the first half between Don Quixote and Sancho. So who's Camacho? Camacho was the wealthy shepherd, and Basilio was the poor shepherd, and they're both in love with the beautiful Quiteria, who Don Quixote immediately thinks is his beloved Dulcinea, which you will all know from the novel. So the actual plot of the story really starts in a way during the second half after all of the earlier stories are depicted. And I won't give away the end because that's really fun. So I think we're going to have to start tuning in a few minutes, but are there any questions? Yes?
I wanted to ask you about the decision on the voices for the characters. Because in the past performances, they were not what you have today. I'm terribly delighted that you've got a countertenor as you love, but I mean, in the past, how did you decide?
The voice ranges are a little puzzling in the Telemann autograph because the two shepherds, Grisostomo and Pedrillo, who tell the story of the opera, they're both cast as sopranos. And this is very puzzling because the opera didn't exist in Hamburg anymore. The castrati were not around. So I don't know whether they were boys who were singing these parts. Presumably they were. That wouldn't really be possible today. We decided to just transpose those into tenor roles, which I think works extremely well. Basilio is actually an alto, mezzo, soprano role, so that works perfectly for a falsettist, a countertenor, as we've cast. The only change in the casting that we've made are the two shepherds, Grisostomo and Pedrillo. Any other questions? All will be revealed in due time. Okay, I hope you enjoy the performance. Thank you for coming.